Welcome to Helping Organizations Thrive. Today I've got Paul Teasdale on the show. Good morning to you, Paul.
Morning, Julian. Great to see you.
Good to see you. You're a coach and facilitator with a focus on helping people perform using insights and experiences from high-performing teams, especially F1. You spent 6 years working with the McLaren Formula One team. That's where you got your insights from, and we will be exploring leadership lessons from F1. So before we get into that, Paul, I'd love to know what do you love about what you do?
Always a great question to open with, Julian. And I love helping people. I love those sort of aha moments that people have. And particularly when I bring these sort of lessons from the F1 world, the element, some of them, those lessons are counterintuitive. And some people are really like, oh, I didn't realize that. But the things that really resonate with me and the things that I really love about what I do is when people realize that high performance is accessible to them. And those things that they think are the realms of the great and the good and the rich and where all the money's at, actually all of those practices, all of those leadership practices, all of those operational practices, data-driven decisions, all sorts of those things are accessible to them at their level to help them perform and be the best that they can. And once you start getting people to realize that actually there are lessons to be taken from all sorts of places, and I can apply them so that I can get that level of performance, then the world's your oyster.
That's fantastic, and I love the idea that we can be inspired by something like Formula One, which can be inspirational, but actually making it a tangible thing that you can have the high performance as well, which I think is always good, because I think sometimes inspiration can be so sort of far out there, we can't always feel attainable and taking it to our own level. And so we are focusing a little bit on your lessons and what the lessons are in terms of leadership from an F1 perspective.
Yeah.
I'd like to understand, how would you describe the leadership style in the context of Formula One?
It's an interesting one, and it's interesting from lots of different levels, and it's also interesting to see how it's moved on over the years. And that, I think, is a key element to what's made it so successful as a sport, as a practice and a leadership inspiration piece, is that innovation happens at all levels in that industry. And it's not just about innovating the car and all the technological innovations that go with it. It's the willingness to learn and adapt, including leadership styles, that's been key. So one of the key things I'd call out is, if you look back in the day, it's always been a heavily passion-driven sport. The people who are in that sport are there for the passion. Believe it or not, there's not huge amounts of money in a lot of those roles. There's big money to be had in some of the top level roles, but actually, a lot of people are in there because it's a passion. They're truly passionate about the sport, about what they do, how to make things better and the best that they can be. And over the years, that leadership style has probably moved from a view of the technologically adept and the best people who are there move up through the ranks, and they therefore become the sage on the stage. The bit that's like, when there's a problem, they look to that leader to solve the problem, and they're looking to it, and that leader would naturally get involved in those problems as well. So even those technical challenges back in the day, you'd probably have people jumping in and saying, right, you need to do this with the car, this is how to sort it, this is the issue, if you don't know this is how to get access to that part. They would know those ins and outs, and that has moved and consciously moved to something. One of the key lessons I pull out is what they call decisions at the point of most knowledge. So how do you make sure that decisions are made where there is the most knowledge for the problem at hand? And that takes, it's an easy thing to say, as you say, when there's a problem with the car and it's, you need to get it out onto the start lane before the race starts, and there's a problem with the car, you've got 2 minutes to go. Who has the decisions as to what to do and how to fix that problem? Traditionally, that would be a leader coming in and directing and saying, right, you need to do this, this, and this. Actually, what you really need to do from a leadership perspective is make sure and put in all the practices so that your people who are closest to that problem, the mechanic who is literally lying on the ground, looking under the car with his spanners and saying, right, You make the decisions as to what to do. And you know that you've got the authority to make those decisions as to what's the safest and the best for the performance that we're trying to drive. And as a leader, your job is not to do that. And I think that's one of the key lessons that you take from leadership is what's your lesson, what is your role and what isn't your role in those situations. So really, taking those kind of things and seeing my role as a leader in those situations is twofold. One, it's to make sure that my people are safe and I can check on the decisions that they're making and I can listen to what they're saying and how they're interacting. And then there's another lesson that I pull out, which is called look for the eyes. So if you're a leader in those times of high stress and highly important sort of challenges and things are going on and your team is trying to solve those problems, where do the eyes go to? If you've got a team and all of those team are looking at the most junior person in that team for inspiration and drive and focus, that's the leader in your team. And they might not be in a leadership position yet, but they are a future leader that you can pull through because the team is already trusting them innately in those times of challenge to help them through. And that's what you need from a leader. You need people who the team will respect, look up to, and look to in those times of need.
That's interesting about I get this right, the making the decisions at the point of greatest knowledge. Is that right?
Yep.
Right? Yeah, that's it. And that to me is, it seems like it's an empowering sort of culture, isn't it? Empowering people to make a decision, feel safe to make a decision, and who are closest to it and know more about it than the leader do. And that's fine, because we're all specialists and that's important to have. How do you create that culture, and how have you seen that in organizations create that culture where there's more empowering and more that, making those decisions at the point of greatest knowledge?
The first thing is to recognize it and to actually call it out and to help people realize that when decisions are being made, the leaders in that organization are either micromanaging or they're stepping in, they're overriding decisions that have been made with people there. And to help them realize that actually, why, it's the classic case of why have a dog and bark yourself? You're employing great people to do great work. You, as a leader, your job isn't to do that work. It's to make sure that work is done and to help those people with the environment and the setup to allow them to do that. So it comes with that recognition first and that sort of inward focus. What are our behaviors? What are we doing in those times of stress? And is that productive and to the success that we're trying to drive? Because if it's actually counterintuitive in the long run, then that's the realization point. Actually, we might need to think about doing something different here. And how do we do something different? Well, we can start to empower our people through making sure that is communicated. People need to feel trusted, and they need to feel that you've got a level of vulnerability as a leader. If they don't feel as if they've got the opportunity to shout out and say no in those times of high stress, then you will have to step in. You've got to empower people and show people that. And I think I was reading a book the other day, and they talked about the sort of Navy SEALs and some of the training that goes along there. And in practice, and they have the debriefs, and a debrief is an absolute critical after action review, however you want to call it, a critical part of the whole process. It's about learning from that and saying, actually, if you saw me next to a window there, and the window might be a bit dusty because that's the environment we're in, I could have been shot by a sniper, and you didn't say anything to me. What would happen there? Well, I'd be shot, and then we wouldn't have the success that we're trying to drive. The team would be one down. There'd be bigger consequences. So you've got to feel, if you see me as a leader doing something that isn't right, you've got to feel able to say, get away from that window, get down, stop doing that, in a way that advances your team along to the goals that you're trying to drive. And I think that's if you realize that accountability and empowerment doesn't just come, you don't just say, you're empowered now, let's go. You've got to help people along with that to show them that they can trust that in those situations, they can step in and they won't feel the wrath or be overridden or have make themselves feel themselves vulnerable or disrespected or whatever it might be in that moment. So there's a lot of vulnerability as a leader that helps you understand and help your people realize that, yes, you are empowered. And I really mean that.
You're tapping in there to I would call psychological safety, where you feel this sense of you can challenge a leader, or as you say, take your leader who's just about to be shot at the window, pull him down and say, get out of the way, because you're challenging him in a sense, and obviously in a very positive way there. And you mentioned sort of vulnerability, and I had a great definition of psychological safety is where vulnerability is rewarded, and it's good to be vulnerable, and it all starts, as you say, with the leader. And I think that people always realize the power and impact of role modeling is really a powerful way of creating behavior, creating cultures, creating change, by you modeling something of how you want it to be. And that's being vulnerable, owning up to mistakes, sharing things, challenging your boss, all that sort of in front of people in obviously kind, respectful way. It's really important. When I look at F1, obviously I know it's not just about race day. There's more to it than race day.
Yeah.
But on the day, and obviously not the whole world, but certainly eyes are on them, and it's a really high pressure situation. And I don't know if many businesses get involved in such high pressure environments, and within that context, what I observe is communication is quite key with that. Yes. And so how do we create good communication, I guess, approach in a high pressure situation? Because often when we're high pressure, sometimes the leader reverts to type and may go a bit autocratic and everything else. How do you maintain the empowerment approach, but also that communication dialogue?
So it's a deliberate practice. So communication is a core skill at any level in that whole team. And as you say, it's not just the race weekend. There's a lot to go through the week, the practice, the setup, the learnings. How do you make decisions on the day and communicate those throughout the team? So there are deliberate communication channels and protocols. And I think, this is something that is very time dependent in the world of F1. It isn't necessarily as time dependent in a lot of other organizations, but it can be. And in those times, you actually need to be clear as to when we come to these situations, how are we going to communicate to each other? And I've worked with a lot of external clients. So my role when I was at McLaren was to go out to external organizations and help them take the methodologies and the ways of working, maybe bring in some technologies and some of the clever people who did analytics and modeling and all sorts of wonderful stuff, but to actually help them understand the practices and the approaches that can really work. And we would often talk about, right, here's how the communication channels work in the world of F1. Only one person talks to the driver. You've only ever got the race engineer talking to the driver, because in that moment when the driver is driving, what you don't want them doing is having multiple conversations in their ear. It's not helpful to the situation. So there are protocols in place. And if you actually listen in on the radio during a weekend, virtually nothing is said for the majority of the race. It's only in times when something needs to happen, a key point needs to be communicated, is the actual communication put in place. And when it does, there are practice routines for how to put that across. How do I be as concise and clear as possible when it comes to saying what I need to do? There's no point in saying, oh, you might need to come into the pits in the next few laps. Possibly, we'll see what happens. And, by the way, Derek had a great weekend and Jaden's going off. And, none of this is relevant in that situation. And recognizing there are high pressure, highly important positions that you need to allow to get on with their job at those moments in time. And those principles can be applied into all sorts of different environments. For example, we used to work with manufacturing organizations where they would have changeovers in of their plant. And when that happens, the quicker you can make the changeover, just like a pit stop, the more productivity you can get out of the line. So there's no point in having lots of communication during the changeover. You need to have that communication prior. You need to be clear as to who is doing what in those situations. And when something goes wrong or when communication needs to happen, let's practice how we do that. And that can be applied. It doesn't have to be in manufacturing. Some same principles in the world of finance, the world of oil and gas drilling, all sorts of different supermarket shelf stacking. We did some great work with as well. So it can be applied to any situation, but it's communication as a deliberate practice so that you are clear as to who's saying what, how you're communicating, and what do you mean when you say certain things.
So this is almost putting in standard operating procedures in some sense of
Yep.
how you're going to communicate in terms of your approach, your style, your timing, your frequency, everything. And it's almost when that situation happens, you're all ready. And I guess the military are probably a similar way of thinking. And I think we often see that as quite regimented and quite sort of fixed, but actually having that framework really probably helps contain a more smoother, precise communication, doesn't it?
Exactly. And if you are practiced in the basics and the things that generally happen, and you are aware of the things that are either likely to or possible to happen in those critical times. So when you see over a race weekend, if you're watching the coverage, for instance, you might see the teams going out and practicing pit stops. And they do a couple of things that are interesting. One is they often practice in their shorts and t-shirt, not in their full gear, and they are just practicing at walking pace. They're not trying to do it in 2.5 seconds or whatever it might be at the time. They're walking through the process, and they're talking to each other and saying, right, this is what I'm doing here. This is my situation. Right, this is a standard pit stop. What happens if we need a new nose? What happens if the front wings come off? What do we do then? In those situations. And you can look back and you can be inspired by historical events. It's amazing the number of people who, when you're looking in, I've got a big history in manufacturing, for instance, and it's actually, this downtime is a one-time event. Well, it's a one-time event that's happened virtually every week for the past year. So it might be slightly different, but it's the same thing that's happened. So when those events happen, you can be practiced for it. It doesn't have to be for the exact thing, but you've got an approach and you've got that framework, as you say, to how to do it. Yeah,
that seems to me it ties into almost building resilience, really, because resilience is that ability to overcome, adapt, and persevere. And obviously, during a race, for example, things go wrong because nothing ever goes to plan. Whether the tires wear down quicker than they thought, the front comes off, all sorts of stuff happens. And I know I talk to a lot of organizations about building resilient processes in place where you almost, and it sounds quite negative, scenario plan the what ifs. It's, and I work with a team of rowers who are rowing around Great Britain, and they did drills, did like man overboard drills.
Right.
Hopefully it'll never happen, but you have to do it. So when it does happen, you can just get on with it. And I guess those sort of principles apply certainly with F1 and within leadership, don't they?
They do. I mean, you only have to look at. I'm a big rugby fan as well. Going to watch the England rugby recently. Somebody gets sent off just before the first half. You go down to 40 men. Those people are practicing during the week. Occasionally, and this is the job of a leader, to just randomly go, right, you're off. You're down to 14 men. How are you going to cope now? And that's about also another way of putting the empowerment and the decisions back into the people of most knowledge, is to say, right, the principles. We've talked through what we need to do. You know how we need to play. We've talked about the scenarios. Now I'm going to have one of those people come off and they're not going to be on the pitch anymore. How are you going to organize yourself on the pitch now? And that's the same that you can do in any organization. Worked in sort of airport operations, for instance. It's like, what happens if those pre-action reviews, or I've got a friend of mine who works who was ex-military. I think they call them action on. So it's like the action on being ambushed at this point is to do this, this, and this. Action on us losing control of our equipment is this. So you understand those key areas that could have an impact on your performance, and you agree what the key principles are. You might practice some of them because you need to get used to it, but actually the action on a front nose cone coming off, the team is already prepared for that because they have understand what needs to happen, why it needs to happen, and how they're going to adapt in that moment in time.
And again, building on that is not only because obviously we don't know what exactly is going to happen, and we might not have scenarioed planned a situation, but you may have scenarioed a plan of if things go wrong, this is how we're going to deal with this, how we're going to manage it and facilitate it through, and how we're going to communicate. And then you talked earlier on about debriefing, which I feel that a lot of organizations don't do enough of. And whether that's a success or a failure, you need to debrief, because that's where you learn, that's where you gather intel for what you do next and how you adapt things and change things. And I think more and more organizations need to create that sort of debrief. And just on the decision making, just want to F1 that they're making decisions that are quite risky.
Yep.
And they've got to balance the whole safety thing. And it'd be interesting to understand how, as a leader within that context, and how we can see take the sort of parallels and learnings, you sort of balance the sort of taking a risk and pushing the business somewhere, but also balancing the, I'll say safety, but the sort of sustainability of the business, making sure it's grounded and financially resilient and all that sort of stuff. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's about understanding what are the results that you're trying to drive. So the easy bit in the world of F1 is we want championship points. That's the results that you're aiming towards and you get there. And any organization, you might want to say we want profit or we want performance, whatever it is. That's an easy thing to say from a results perspective. What people don't articulate enough, I don't think they don't know about this, but they don't tend to articulate it and make sure it's very clear, is what are the boundaries of those of achieving that performance? What are the things that we want to make sure we're getting that result, and we're also driving a sustainability agenda, we're also being safe, we're also working towards fan engagement in that sense. So it's about understanding what are those strategic priorities of the organization, and using those as a framework to frame what success means to you. So as I say, in the world of F1, you've got to be within the regulations, and this is where it starts to become quite applicable, is that yes, you want a result, but you are limited by regulations. All organizations are limited by the regulations of applying there. Some may choose to play more in the gray areas of regulations. Some may choose that because of the risk involved that they are going to stick very black and white to the regulations, or even play safer below that level. Similar can be for sustainability, for instance. Some people might want to say, right, we just want to have them a minimum sort of get onto the dance floor kind of level of impact on sustainability. Some might say we want to go above and beyond. That's where we are going to differentiate ourselves. Therefore, you need to think about that when you are taking actions. And this is one of the frameworks I help people with, is that results come first, both in terms of what you want to achieve and how you want to achieve it, followed by what are the actions that you've got at your disposal to impact those results, and how do those actions impact those sort of multivariant sides of things. So if you were to take an action as to do I pit once or twice in a race, for instance, or do I change the design of a car? All those things have an impact. They're at your disposal to impact the results you're trying to drive. But actually, people need to decide on those actions. So who are those people, and how are those people set up? How are they motivated? Have you got the right people in place with the right levels of expertise? And then once you've got the right people in place, it's what insights do they need to actually help them make the best decisions that have the overall best impact. It's never as simple as one set result. You can achieve something in a way that is actually negative for you in the long run. And I'll give you an example of this in a minute from my experience. But just following on this final bit of framework, you need, what insights do your people need? What are the bits of information and data that you can present to them in such a way that it helps with the decision? And that's where I differentiate the word insights. It's the way in which you bring information together and present it to people so that they know roughly how it's going to impact the decision that they're making. And then finally, there's the data. So I've got this rapid performance framework. So results, actions, people, insights, and data. And data comes last. And you might think in the world of F1, with it being so data-driven, that you want more data is better. Actually, you want the smallest possible data set that drives the insights that your people can act upon to give you the results. And the reason for that is generally with the car, for instance, you can get more data from a car, but it requires a sensor. It requires some sort of telemetry, which implies weight, which slows your car down and has a negative impact on your performance. So you actually don't want to have more and more data. You want to have less and less. So it's identifying that minimum data set. And this is something that I help people with a lot, which is who's driving what data your people need to make the best decisions. Are you pushing reports to them? You're pushing data at them in such a way that they are drowning in all of that data. And are they getting insights from that data in the way you're presenting it? Or are they having to do cognitive load in terms of what does this data mean in my situation? How does it help me with the response that I'm going to make? An interesting sort of anecdote here. I sat in with one of the hospitals with a team that were looking to have their monthly rounds on it was prostate cancer pathway. So they've got a group of about 50 individuals under their care who they are deciding what's the next step. So this month, how are these individuals going to be progressed? Do we keep on the same treatment? Do we do something different? They've got about 20 people in the room. And the first thing, everybody's got a printout of all of these 50 individuals and their key details. And you've got hematologists, oncologists, all sorts of specialists in their areas. And the first thing on the list is, right, we've got an individual here. He was born in 1977, and and you just see at that point in time, everybody switches off like that. Because they're going, right, 1977, that must mean he must be 45. Right, okay. Or is it 46? Depends when his birthday is. Or maybe 4. And you can just see people switching off in that moment. And the actual insight that those people needed was, which age bracket is this individual in? Because it has an effect on the decisions as to, if you've got a younger person, you might want a more aggressive treatment, or you might be less risky in certain areas. But it's actually really, if you've got a younger person with other metrics, maybe their BMI, their height, their weight, all those things combined mean that they are at this level of risk compared to somebody else. So why not present that data to the whole team in a way that they use? So give them that visual of, they're in the 45 to 50 bracket. They are, this weight and height and smoker, non-smoker, whatever it is that's there. And therefore they are in this bracket from a risk perspective. And that helps all of that cognitive load is taken off. And it might seem small, but in that moment where people are making big decisions, you don't want them thinking about how do I convert a date into an age. So, and there are so many moments like that you can have in any organization where if you truly look as a leader, how am I helping my people make better decisions? Well, is the reporting that I'm giving them, is the reporting that they're asking for truly helping them there? Or are they, they've got two reports and they're looking from one side to another as to, well, it's that and that. So I've got my BMI here, I've got my height there, I've got my age there. And I'm trying to pull all that together, help them with making the decisions. And that's where, as a leader, you can start to see, if you're looking out for your people and saying, where is your cognitive load being taken such that, I can release some of that. There's so much to be done with technology and data and analytics these days, but it's got to be done in the right way. And if you take that sort of rapid performance approach, then that's really helped people to have a framework for thinking that through and getting that right.
That's really helpful. Actually, I like that idea of being more aware of the information, the data you give to your team, or what you request as well, to make sure that it's not creating that cognitive load. I think that's really, really helpful insight, because I think often we do think we need to have more information, more data, but actually sometimes the old adage, less is more, and I think it's more powerful and more robust. I'm also make sure you got the right stuff, but as you say, rather than giving somebody's the year of birth, give them their actual age, because they don't have to work it out themselves. Very simple, but very powerful as well. This has been brilliant, Paul. I really thank you for your insights, and I think there's some real strong, obviously, parallels. You obviously work with clients to do this exact thing, take those learnings from F1, and you put it into the world of work. If people want to connect with you and want to get in touch with you, what's the best way of doing that?
So I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. So you find me on LinkedIn, probably be linked into here and maybe in the show notes, but I think I'm under Paul James Teasdale. And you can also see my website, paulteasdale.co.uk, and you can connect with me there. I've got the first thing that comes up there is an opportunity to have a free, no obligation chat with me, find out if and how this can be of value to you. And that's all I want to do, is I want to add value back to people. So if you want to find out more, then reach out, and I'm more than happy to have a chat and make this high performance more accessible to people in all sorts of organizations.
Excellent. Well, thank you for your time today, Paul.
Thank you, Julian. An absolute pleasure, mate.